The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.
I'm Catherine, and this is the Movie Health Podcast, where we talk about movies for mental health. Today we interview Lisa Bahar. Lisa Bahar is a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional clinical counselor. She received her graduate degree from Pepperdine University in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy and a baccalaureate in cinema television production from the University of Southern California. Lisa is a PhD in philosophy, student in global leadership and change, cohort 2020 at Pepperdine University. Lisa is known as a creative therapist, particularly with her use of cinematography, a collaborative tool of using film stories as symbolic metaphors for challenges clients may be facing. Lisa is also known as a DBT therapist and provides DBT-informed skills training groups in Orange County. Welcome, Lisa. AJ interviewed you in episode 2 of the podcast. We're so glad that you're back with us, talking about another film you feel passionate about and can be used in the practice of cinematography.
Well, I'm so happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you back. Thank you. Today you chose the film The Tree of Life. So I'll just do a little blurb on it. So it's written and directed by Terrence Malick. It stars Brad Pitt, Jessica Chastain, Sean Penn, and it introduced Ty Sheridan and Hunter McCracken. It was also produced by Brad Pitt, and notably the cinematographer was Emmanuel Lubezki. So the movie is described as an impressionistic story of a Texas family in the 1950s, when a man reconciles his relationship with his father and looks back on his childhood. It's a visually stunning film, which has many interesting film techniques like overlapping whispered voiceovers, many close-ups, use of orchestral music throughout, and shots of nature and the universe on a grand scale. It uses a lot of artistic imagery and fragmented narration. In terms of genre, it's seen as a fantasy or science fiction, an experimental family drama, and coming-of-age film. It won multiple awards ranging from film festivals and film critic awards, mainly for Jessica Chastain, Best Cinematography and Original Screenplay. It's been ranked by some publications to be one of the best films of the 2010s, the 21st century, and even of all time. So, Lisa, I would love to know why you chose this film.
Well, I chose this film because it seems to be one that really, actually I was inspired. It just came through an inspirational process of prayer and what to choose for our show, to be working together again. And I think the running theme that I've noticed just more so, it's probably been an ongoing running theme, but it's become more apparent, is this seeking of fulfillment in life or meaning and purpose and somewhat of a desire to reconcile conflicts within on a deeper level versus, focusing on external problems. There's a lot of internal contemplation. And so I thought The Tree of Life would be a wonderful film to explore on the show and talk about it from a therapeutic perspective and how it can help.
Yeah. I saw it years ago. I know we talked about this before, and I guess it's a movie that many people don't understand the first viewing, and it's like you have to kind of watch it multiple times. Would you say that your experience of watching it, I'm assuming several times, has changed your outlook on it?
Well, absolutely. And I completely understand what you said 10 years ago or when it was released. I remember not understanding it at all. I wasn't quite sure, what is this about? It just seemed like a lot of imagery, and the storyline wasn't your atypical one. But as I watched it, actually after the inspiration, I hadn't watched it. I just was inspired to say, I'm going to choose The Tree of Life before I even watched it for the show. And then I watched it and I loved it because it really had an experience associated with it, which is really in alignment with cinema therapy, that when someone watches this film, it has aspects that each person who's viewing it will certainly have a different experience. And it's so multifaceted that you could watch it and I could watch it, and you'll take away different parts of the film that won't be just, oh, I love that scene, or that line was so great. It might be, oh, I missed that. Or did you feel that? I was feeling, there's just has a whole different experience from a therapeutic level.
Mm. Yeah, I feel that the film definitely evokes a lot of emotion, and it is such a personal experience. I find that it's very meditative, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously, it's really interesting because Terrence Malick actually graduated with a degree in philosophy from Harvard University, and the film itself is so philosophical and touches on really metaphysical aspects. I'm really curious if I know that the whole film is full of scenes that just kind of capture you and to take your breath away. Are there standout scenes that you want to speak about today?
The ending scene where Jack, who is a grown man now, played by Sean Penn, is reflecting back, and he's coming to terms with this reconciliation of all of these parts of his life. And he's experiencing these parts in this imagery of people that were, in his life that we as the viewers didn't experience directly through the screen. But there's people that we see, whether it's his mother or his father or his brothers, or who we've seen in the film and his experiences. But it was the contemplation of the conflicts that he endured coming together as we integrate these parts of ourselves through a therapeutic reflective process, which is the movie, which is Jack narrating his life to us. That final scene of where he comes to terms with his own life um, really spoke to me, among many
Mm.
other, but that was the scene that I think of when you ask that question, the
Is
final
this
scene.
particularly, yeah, is this specifically the scene in the beach when there's all the people walking and then he
Yeah.
meets his father and yeah, his family? Okay. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I noticed that water is a great motif in the film, and I guess it represents the way of grace, which is something that we're yet to touch
Mm-hmm.
upon. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so how would you describe the main themes? I know that it is
Mm-hmm.
nature versus grace.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that was part of the experience that Mrs. O'Brien, played by Jessica Chastain, she represents the grace of life, whereas Mr. O'Brien, played by Brad Pitt, represents nature, and how
Mm.
these conflict on the path that you choose in life. That Mrs. O'Brien embodied the experience of living through this graciousness as Mr. O'Brien propelled through life, trying to
Mm.
conquer and deal with life on life's terms, and having the armor of living life, whether he was seeking to dominate, his wife through grace, which is the another theme. And it's interesting, I didn't know
Mhm.
Terrence Malick had a degree in philosophy, but the theme of the battle between um, dominating and submission, and what that experience is, or vulnerability versus harshness,
Mm.
um, that that's a running theme in people of, following one's ego, if we want to look at it in a therapeutic
Yeah.
sense, or do we go with the graciousness of allowing people, or forgiving people, or accepting people, or accepting ourselves, you know?
Mhm.
So I think the running themes of the film are a reconciliation within, but also a reconciliation with science, with religion, and how those come to an impasse. I think Terrence Malick, through his imagery, did a magnificent job of pulling the elements of nature and
Mm.
pulling the elements of spirituality and religion, and how those are actually can be reconciled. And is that metaphorical to the experience of being part of this universe, of being a product of creation, whatever your philosophy or religion or your faith is, of that reconciliation process. And that prompts me to one other thought that is a bit of a reach, but I'd like to just acknowledge it. You and I were having a conversation, and you mentioned a song, and you said there was a line from the song that resonated with you, that spoke to you when we were talking about Tree of Life. And you said a beautiful statement, and I can paraphrase it, but I would love to hear you say it again. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. So it was in relation to another film that I interviewed about. So there's a song called Let Go by Frou Frou, and there's a line in it that says, there's beauty in the breakdown. That really
beauty in the
resonated with
breakdown.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, that did it full circle for me when thinking about Jack, played by Sean Penn, how he breaks down on that beach and just he succumbs to grace.
Yes, he does. He finally follows the way of grace, and I think it's demonstrated through him meeting his younger self as well, in the desert. That was so symbolic in many ways. There are such stunning scenes of nature and the universe, and it's really fascinating because it's showing like the birth, the creation of life, or the beginning of time, the beginning of the universe, and then it goes into the kind of micro world of a family and like a domestic family drama. And I love how, Brad Pitt is seen as, like you said, like a way of dominance and harshness. He refers to himself, like he tells his children to call him your father rather than dad, and he's very persistent about that. And then Jessica Chastain's character as Mrs. O'Brien, you barely hear a word from her until maybe the end, and when she has her voiceover, and we have to kind of rely on her body language, her facial expressions. It was very powerful acting, and I think the fact that Brad Pitt's character was actually the dominant voice in the film, I guess it shows kind of how, like, the world and reality as it is, that people feel the need to adopt that way of life above the way of the soul, above the way of like looking internally, like you were saying at the beginning, and seeking something deeper, more profound. But yeah, would you say that you have a favorite character in the film?
I would say it would be Jack, the narrator of the film, and how he, the storyline is a projection of his memories and his reflections, and drawing upon those. And even as I'm thinking about it, I'm actually moved right now on just how you can go back in time and just take the moment to contemplate where you where life became more challenging, or when having to deal with the disappointments, or realizing that your parents are people, that he had to go through his own process of being enraged with his father and having to tell his father he loved him, or yes sir, or just the conflicts that he was dealing with, or how he adored his mother but felt, there's a lot of psychodynamic Oedipal complex work there, where he was competing with his father for his mother, and was enraged with his mother for not standing up to him, to Mr. O'Brien, and how challenging that was for Jack, and then Jack being sent away, or the delicate part of his brother, that sweetness that he couldn't embody, that he had to figure out how to deal with it in a different way, which later in his life had him look back and realize how vulnerable, he is. And so I would say, in answer to your question, it would be Jack, the one who was most, it was his story, he's the one I enjoyed as of today. But like I said, this movie brings out different feelings. Last week it was Jessica Chastain, and then I certainly related to Brad Pitt, and Mr. O'Brien. But today I'm really reflecting on Jack.
Yeah. The film really shows the complexities of human relationships. I think, Mr. O'Brien, even though he was very harsh and dominant, he was also very loving and affectionate. And I think the brothers trying to reconcile with that, like you can tell that they had a sense of play and respect for their father, but also that there was a lot of fear. And I'm just really, fascinated to hear what you think about the complex dynamics and relationships between the characters.
Great question. I just see a lot of projection going on, and conflict, inner conflict that each of the family members represent as a system of a being, that we have the grace within if we're allowed to access it. It's that vulnerable part of us, our soul. That's that spirituality. That's embodied by, that character Grace or Mrs. O'Brien, who represents that. And then the nature, the need to be assertive, to grow up, to adult, and live life, and not get, you got to stay in the race and be strong and do what you need to do to survive, embodied by Mr. O'Brien. And then the brothers who are there, who serve as people in our lives, for example, that may idealize us or get lost along the way, that they're there, they're present, but they're parts of the self or parts of the system that, either take front and center, or sometimes they kind of stay on the quiet one, the middle child who's, a little lost there. You don't quite hear about the middle brother as much. And yet the youngest brother was the one that was most adored. So I see a lot of interrelational dynamics. And I think what really resonated with me is the grief and the loss of when someone from the family dies, and what could have been said and wasn't said, or things that were said, and how time is of the essence to say sorry.
Yeah. And I'm also really curious what you thought about the music and how that contributed to the story.
Imagine the music. And I think that these are famous scores that I'm not going to even venture to try to repeat the conductor and the orchestras and all the things that go along with that beautiful music score. But isn't music such an enhancer of imagery and a life experience that, if words don't put it out there in terms of dialogue, it's like you said, the body, the communication with, body following the rhythm and the melody of music, and how music is such a character in itself, that creation, which this movie certainly embodies, the creation of life and the tree of life and the fruits of life, juxtaposed with this musical score, just so brilliantly choreographed with all of the images, is very, very much a significant element of the experience of watching this movie.
Yeah, and I think it's really clear that the relationship between Terrence Malick and his cinematographer, obviously they really had to agree and collaborate on these aspects. I know Terrence Malick is known to be an auteur. I guess he has a very distinctive style. He's also very reclusive, like anyone barely hears from him. And really powerful directors like Christopher Nolan and David Fincher actually say that his work has strongly influenced their work. I'm wondering if there's other aspects of the film, like on a film like perspective, that you think made this film, I guess, even more like stand out and immersive for you.
Just the cinematography and the overall production that's taking place within the film. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is the key to creative collaboration, that I so respect the artistic experience of what Terrence Malick represents, in terms of being a recluse and doing, I believe that, I come from a family of artists that they do their best work solo, and I don't know, how that's just, it's a soulful experience. And, I very much respect what you've shared about Terrence Malick and how he's not easily accessible, is that he protects this. I'm interpreting it as, this is very subjective, but he's protecting this pearl of creative alignment that he can bring forth and put it into action without, I don't know if he could do that with other things going on, the way I see his work, particularly the Tree of Life. But if he could find people who can collaborate and complement that, of which I think is such a creative blessing, then that's even more powerful on how he was able to do that and have that synergetic experience of people coming together and create something that is so powerful. I mean, wow. Isn't that amazing to find people like that you can, have that kind of spiritual experience with? I think creativity is very spiritual. I
Yeah,
think,
no, I agree. Yeah. And I think, obviously all the elements of the film came together. And, a lot of people call this film a masterpiece,
Oh, do
even
they?
though, yeah, it can be very difficult to comprehend, but it's also something that you need to feel. It's not something necessarily to intellectualize or try to understand rationally, but just to like immerse yourself in it and just, I guess, be open to the experience. I remember in the previous conversation we had, you talked about this symbolism of the trees. Obviously, the title being Tree of Life. I'm curious if you wanted to elaborate on that. What you think the trees represented in the actual film? Because they showed many different kinds of trees throughout the life stages, and yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that they showed many different kinds of trees through the life stages. I didn't see that piece there, but that makes a lot of sense. Trees are, you don't know what kind of tree it is until it bears its fruit, unless you're an expert on trees. At least I don't know what kind of tree it is until I see the fruit. So that's something that is very telling of what kind of fruit do we bring into the world, and what kind of fruit do we produce, whether it's, through children, or whether it's through our creative endeavors, or whether it's through relationships or the works that we do, or whatever the case may be. Trees are very representative in my mind of God, and the roots that go into the earth are of nature, and how the blossoming of life comes forth in this form of, fruits and different kinds of berries and things that flowers and all the things that go along with the beginning and the ending of seasons and life, and how different kinds of trees can represent different experiences in our lives. So I see the Tree of Life is, there's so much context in the Bible about trees, but there's also a lot of exploration of trees. Hugging a tree is a very spiritual, New Age approach to trees. So trees are very powerful and probably have a lot to tell us.
Yes. Yeah. I really like the scene where the priest is reading his sermon, and then obviously there's all these like images that go with that. And he talks about how, I guess, the value of goodness, and the idea that like we all have to experience suffering. I'm really curious with the practice of cinematography, if you've used this film before, or if you haven't, in what context would you use it? And like in the film itself, there's a crisis, and there's a period of the family questioning their faith. So I'm wondering if that's maybe an element that you would be using within cinematography, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It would be, well, first of all, I've brought it up to clients since our conversation about visiting again on the Movies for Mental Health podcast. So I have brought it up since I've been contemplating and reflecting and just preparing for our visit on an individual level with people. I've brought it up, and I've certainly recommended it for those kinds of existential questions that come up about I'm not feeling fulfilled or I don't know my purpose. But if I were to structure this for a group experience, I would see this as a film that would be experienced together in a group, and that we would have a very it's a longer film than usual. So we would take time to not necessarily go to the cognitive experience, but take the time for reflection of being able to explore reflective thoughts. Now, that might be through a journaling after the film that we come back and talk about it at another time, or if it comes back, if it's film. I'm very cautious on going and working in cinema therapy with a film like this, many others, but this one in particular is coming to mind, that it's something that speaks to the soul, to the spirit, and that would be interrupted through a cognitive and thinking process. It's something that stays with you and you leave thinking or experience. It's an experience of life. It's an experience of a creative, a creative endeavor, that what you explore in your reflection through a journaling or just through memory of sharing within the group will prompt others to bring up other experiences that they have. So I see this as a film that would be explored together, a film that would be explored cinematically in therapy by selecting scenes that people felt resonated with them the most, like what you asked me on, what scene, and bringing forth an experience of an interpretation of what they have, because the film is filled with opportunity for interpretation and projection.
Yes.
And where that would lead a exploratory conversation on, where how this piece resonated with you, and what does that represent of an unhealed part of the self. That's where I would go in terms of timing. It would be something that we would chart enough time to have probably 5 hours of cinema therapy, but it would be a process, and it might be like a sequence process of 1, 2, 3, watch the film, come back. Second sequence would be a therapeutic exploration, and the third sequence would be, an unhealed part that someone can relate to metaphorically to the film.
Yeah. No, that's really great. I was imagining that as you were describing it. I'm wondering if there's like specific issues that you think clients would present with that you think this film would be very effective for.
No, great question. Well, certainly family, grief and loss. Seeking to understand with not realizing or not knowing until you watch a film like this. When you're ready, that you're looking for answers and realizing through this film that there are no real answers. There's really just an experience of what life is. There's a line in the movie, I'm going to paraphrase, but I'm going off my memory, is the Jack is praying or speaking through the voiceover of, who are we to you? Who are we? Who are we to you? Well, that's an ongoing question of the human experience of, where were you when I needed you? Where, how come you let this happen? These are questions that one might find themselves asking that don't necessarily get answered through a direct, this is why, but it comes through insight, contemplation, and just accepting. And sometimes the access point is forgiving. And I think this film is a great film to explore forgiveness.
Yes.
grief and forgiveness, the acceptance level of forgiving people.
Yeah, there's a particular line from Jessica Chastain when she says, her voiceover is, "Help each other, love everyone, forgive." Yeah,
Help
goes
each
straight
other,
to your
love
point.
everyone for you.
Yeah, and it's, I think, everything she says is just is so gracious and merciful, and kind of shows like the spiritual way of life. I agree with you that watching this film, I imagine people who are dealing with grief and loss issues, family problems, even like maybe parenting conflict, and resentment. Like this film would be very good to reconcile those issues. Are there any other, parts of dialogue in the film that speak to you, even if we want to paraphrase it, because I know it's hard to remember like everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Boy, there's so many great lines in this film. I think while you were talking, I was thinking, I was going back to your other question, actually, when you were talking about who do you think this would be a great
Yeah.
recommendation for, and you were acknowledging the family and those dynamics. I'll go back to your line question too, of how I wonder what it would be like for somebody like a father to watch this film who might be coming in, going through the grief or the loss of maybe a wife or a marriage, or the conflict of a child that won't speak to them, or who's emotionally estranged, or is enraged with them or angry, who has difficulty with pride.
Yeah.
I think this movie would have an impact to just validate and understand Mr. O'Brien, his character. I'm thinking of lines. I guess the imagery is the biggest line, just the imagery of seeing creation in the way that the production value, choosing, maybe the line of choosing, which you have to make a choice of, are you going to go and lean towards grace, or are you going to lean towards nature?
Yeah.
And I would have to say, earlier on in my first part of my life, I would say I was definitely very sweet and leaning towards grace, but right now I'm very leaning towards nature. So I appreciated this film of how to soften up a little bit, and balance those, reconcile those, and explore those, and allow those gentle parts to come forth.
Mm-hmm. And I think, there's this scene with Mr. O'Brien, even in the beginning, actually, when, their son RL passes away, and then he has a moment of self-awareness where he reflects on how difficult he was as a father. And then later on, when he loses his job, and he says, I wanted to be loved because I was great. I lived in shame. I'm a foolish man. And it's like he actually realizes introspectively that like his way actually wasn't constructive, like within his family, and it actually hurt his family. So I think that's really powerful in the context that you mentioned about a father who has like too much pride and isn't necessarily like aware about that part of himself, to be really influenced by this film. I think it'd be really impactful. And also, I think near the end, there's a voiceover of Jack when he was young. It's interesting that the voiceovers are mostly whispered, actually, where he says, "Father, mother, always you wrestle inside me." And, that inner conflict. I don't know if you wanted to speak about that, maybe, if there's,
Wow.
anything.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. That's that wrestling. That can be, that's so internal, and yet so big. If we go this micro macro kind of experience of how that internal conflict of who our parents are, who brings us into the world, is one thing biologically, but it can also mean who serves as our caregivers in the beginnings and throughout our life. Who were those people, of those inner conflicts that they prompt in us, depending on your beliefs of what that is. Are these, different people have different perspectives on how conflict experience. Are they generational? Are they something that we come into the world clean slate? Are they something where we pick up along the way? But there's a battle there. I think the human experience through a philosophical lens is certainly, which is cinematic and spiritual and all the things we're talking about, is a consistent battle of this, some sort of conflict that, depending if you're looking at it from a spiritual war, depending on the good and the evil, depending on the nature versus grace, depending on the psychological conflicts that we, don't want to face. And then when we do, we face the fear. It's something where we're released from it. I think that this is life. This is part of the human experience. So when you ask me, can I speak to the ideas of conflict and how I heard your question, I think that that's why we're here, is to deal with that and perhaps ultimately experience it through the constructs of nature with the outcome of grace, which is to love other people and love ourselves and forgive ourselves and reflect on our lives, which is cinematography.
Yes, exactly. And I guess seeing, like you said, life is a process of like confronting ourselves ultimately. And it is like forgiving our past. It's a whole range of things. And, this film is, it also showcases the lasting impact of parents, and how our childhood really impacts our adulthood. And just the whole reflection of like all the stages of life. I think that it makes the scenes with Sean Penn even more powerful. I'm wondering what you thought about those scenes, because there's only a few interspersed throughout the film, and obviously at the end when it shows him reconciling with his past. But yeah, just wondering what you think of those specific scenes.
So your question cut out a little bit, but I think what you're asking, if I got this right, and then correct me, is what do I think about the reconciliation of what when Sean Penn Jack is reflecting on his life and how he reconciles that?
Yeah.
What are my thoughts about that? Was that what you're asking? I think you're released. I think what I see on reconciliation is you've given up the struggle. You've released the burden that one has been carrying within themselves. That he's reconciling when he said, I'm sorry, when he makes the phone call, and I just needed to say that. You finally let go of the willfulness of resisting your thoughts. You have a mindset shift. And once you can let things go, it's a breakthrough. You're breaking through to the next level, and you're adding more depth, and you're healing what has fallen apart, which appears to fall apart, but is now coming back together, but in a different way. You're different.
Yeah.
So reconciliation is very powerful, and it's a balance of remembering and reflecting, but at the same time letting them go.
Yeah, it's like what we were saying before with the line from the song, "There's beauty in the breakdown."
Right.
Where it's deeply painful, but I guess it's a necessary process, and he had to go through that in order to move forward with his life and find balance and harmony within himself. I know this might be putting you on the spot, but as a marriage and family therapist, I wonder, would you use this film in couples therapy?
It's a good question. It depends on where I would be using it to illustrate something that is challenging for both to see.
Yeah.
Perhaps a grief of a child.
Yeah.
Or a loved one. If that's something that's pulling people away from each other, I might find it helpful there. It would be very, in my mind, it would have to be inspired in the moment where I'm pretty much knowing that this is going to speak to this experience between both these people in a way that therapy from myself, I need more. I need the cinema to the experience of these characters to be present, and whether it can be probably the most powerful imagery, but it also could be like, I don't get it. It's like, you just never know. So you have to, I would have to really be knowing in my heart that this, and I think that's what we do as therapists in this medium of cinema therapy, is to know movies in the way that you do and know, this is such a perfect time. If I could just bring this up and have you watch this, it might not work, but I think this could really speak to all of us as we work through this.
Yes.
And see where it goes.
So you're saying that it would be from an inspired place. So you'd need to feel that it resonated with a specific family or that specific couple in the time that you're seeing them. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because couples therapy is, if you've got a synergy going with working in the working phase of therapy, adding something like this, if you're in the system, if you're part of the process and you've been welcomed into these people's lives, and we add this element of cinema that enhances the connection of the experience and provides that kind of healing, that the beauty of movies is that they speak for themselves. Then I could see that as one of the most profound sessions.
Yeah, I think so. And I really like how you said before that you would do this in a group session. I think that would be incredible because you get unique perspectives from everyone who attends the group. And I actually imagine, like, I don't know if you would think this would be beneficial, but like even a family watching the film together, but as in like adult children with adult children, because obviously, like younger children wouldn't get it. But I imagine that process, potentially being effective as well.
I wonder though, I don't know, like youth are, I'm just starting to work. I get a little skittish on working with younger people. They smell fear, and I get a little nervous around, working with young people, but they've certainly been, I've had parents wanting to bring their children in and they've been open to it. I'm not so sure all children would not get this for some reason, because they might get it more so than myself or, an adult. They might be more like, I get, they might understand it much more. You never know. I don't see it as inappropriate for children. I see it as a film that will have a spiritual impact, and the mindsets and the alignment of where we are, in my opinion, in the world, kind of philosophically speaking, I would venture to say it's worth the chance if a therapist can assess and see if it would be helpful. I didn't get it as a younger person, but that certainly doesn't mean that somebody else, I think children have a lot of wisdom, actually, now that I'm kind of checking them out and seeing what's going on. What do you think about all this? They'll give you an earful. That's really wise.
That's true. Yeah. Actually, it's worth seeing. That's true. Like, a child or an adolescent might actually resonate with this film more than we anticipate. Yeah.
I don't know. Our culture is a little interruptive with technology and all the things, but this really embodies the experience of being with the elements of the earth versus
Yeah.
technology and devices and, you know, children playing. Who would have thought those were the days, you know, rolling around in the grass or jumping into a lake. You know, it's different times
Yeah.
now. Mm.
Yeah, that's true. I was watching a video of the analysis of the film, and the
Mm.
person was saying that this movie is one of the best depictions of childhood ever put to film. And you know, I
Oh,
guess I
really?
would agree with that somewhat. Yeah. I think like you said, the film is very sensuous. It's very grounded. It engages you fully. So in that way, I think, you know, it could be effective for anyone watching it. And whatever their takeaways from it would be, it's you know, that's
Mm.
obviously very personal. I'm wondering what the biggest take. I know you probably already mentioned it, but what's the biggest takeaway from this movie for you?
Mm. Uh,
Or maybe more than one.
for
That's
me,
that's too.
is to
Yeah.
really, you know, it made me slow down. You know,
Mm.
it just to stop and slow down and be able to be present. It sounds so simple, but you know, it's always on the go and looking at the clock and just not take the headphones off when you're on the running. I run on the beach every morning. It's like, take the headphones off and just listen to the waves. What are you doing? You know, just
Yeah.
be with the earth, you know, be with the experience of life and allow just that time to be contemplative and slow down. You know, we're
Mm.
living in a very fast culture and life, at least here in America, certainly. Whew.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
but I would say, and spiritually, now I don't know. It just seems like I know that there's a, well, I'm speaking from my own perspective, but there's a lot of spiritual distress and people seeking meaning in their life and purpose and who are they? Maybe that's been going on lifetimes, but I'm really feeling that there's a craving, a hunger for something. Please talk to me about something that gets me connected. I'm suffering. I'm scared. I'm isolated. I'm really anxious. I just want to die.
Mm.
It's like, I get it, you know? And these kinds of movies can connect with people and remind them that there's a whole tapestry of life out there. You're part of it, and don't go. Stay,
Mm.
keep going.
Yeah.
You know, you matter.
Yeah.
Mm. So it's those sorts of things. When
And
time's
you know
not.
what you were saying before about just being in the present moment. I know, like, you know, everyone says that, but it's like, do we actually
Mm.
do it? You know, like it
Right.
sounds so trite, but it's like we actually do
Mm.
forget, and I think often take for
Mm-hmm.
granted just being in the moment. And I think that's so important for mental health.
Mm.
And if we were talking
Definitely.
about mental health tips or mental health recovery, it's like actually just,
Mm.
like, yeah, slowing
Mm.
down, pausing.
Mm.
That's also important in our, like, fast-paced lifestyles. You know, I feel
Mm.
like that's most places in the world now, unfortunately. Um,
Mm.
but
So true.
um, and you know, like the movie really shows like the transient nature of life as well.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's a very poetic and philosophical film. So much can be gained from it. So many
Mm.
insights. What was there anything else you wanted to mention about the movie and how we can use it within the practice of cinematherapy?
I would just say, as a therapist or a person out there who's um, looking for a film to be somewhat perplexed by, inspired by, disturbed by, give it a chance. Watch it. It's an experience, and you'll never forget it. Maybe
Yeah.
some movies you never forget. Maybe all movies you never forget. But this one, you'll definitely, it stays with you. Whether or not you get it or you don't get it, give it a try and watch it at any point. When you're happy, when you're sad, when you're, I think it's a great movie to keep people going.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good
Mm.
reminder, isn't it?
Yes,
And I
it
feel
is.
like it's a movie that I need to watch in 5 years' time or like 10 years' time again.
Right?
I kind of just need to like revisit it.
Right?
So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Did you say that you watched it
Exactly.
10 years ago, and then you watched it again
I
recently?
did.
Yeah,
Yeah. I didn't watch it until I was inspired to talk to you. And I was thinking,
awesome.
what movie am I going to choose of all the movies? What am I going to choose? What am I going to choose? And then that's what it came through with the prayer. And I thought, okay, I'll go watch the Tree of Life. And then I started to read it. And, I have my own walk of faith in the Bible, and Tree of Life kept coming up in Proverbs. And I'm like, okay, I'll go and get Tree of Life. Okay. So I
Mm.
went and got Tree of Life. And I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to share it with you, and also was inspired to talk about it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Such a great film choice. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Lisa. It's always great to talk to you. And yeah, I really love that you chose this film, because as I was watching it, I had to kind of break up the viewing. I couldn't watch it all in one go, because I had to like sit with it and
Right?
just reflect on it for a bit.
Right?
But I
Right?
think that's the power of film as well. So, and this is a very unique type of film, and I would recommend it to anyone as well, like looking for, like searching for life's answers. And I guess we all do at certain points of our life. So it's good to watch this at different stages as well. So
I agree.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClipper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.